Hello, and welcome to another edition brought to you by the Teacher's Toolkit Series. My contact information can be found at the end of this presentation, so please like, share, and subscribe. All right, so this presentation today is for educators who are brand new to the profession or those who just need a quick refresher on how to establish a well-run classroom. So let's get into it. So, first of all, let's go into teaching. What is teaching? It's a powerful educational experience that's a result of some fundamental principles of continuity and interaction. Those two are very, very important. So, simply put, um, your past experiences, your present experiences, and your future experiences all influence your ability or your capacity to learn. So, it's a social process and it is part of this large economic growth. We're trying to grow learners, we're trying to grow people who are problem solvers, people who are adaptable. They can be passionate about learning, they're reflective, and essentially, we want to mold students to be critical thinkers. So, you as a teacher, you are a mentor to a learner. Teaching is also a science and it is also an art. So you don't kind of like walk onto the stage of teaching just ready to teach day one because you just saw somebody teaching and therefore you feel, oh, I can do this. It's a science. It calls for a reflective process and also for professionals to look at their knowledge base and their skills. It sets you apart really in the professional field because you might know something, but how do you teach it to it, or how you are able to teach it to other people is another kettle of fish. You have to have knowledge of child development. You must know the structure of a curriculum. You have to have knowledge of cognitive psychology, how people learn. So there are many people who know a lot of things, but not a lot of people know how to teach what they know. Um, then it's also an art. It calls for skillful, caring professionals to adapt scientific knowledge to special situations and students. So, this part over here, really and truly, you have to study how people learn. You have to study how people adapt to. Or how they respond to learning experiences and how learning environments can influence the information that you are trying to teach people. So, as we're talking about this too, you have to realize too that teaching face to face is completely different from when you are teaching online. You also have to exercise professional judgment and personal judgment to decide which approach works best and when to use it. Now, most times when people are in front of a class, they have a lesson plan, and some folks just want to stick to that plan to the T. But you have to also pay attention to the people you are teaching. You have to be responsive to their reactions to the information that you're presenting to them. Sometimes you have to predict the number of responses that you might have or even the pushback. And so you have to have more than one plan in mind. You have to go in with a plan A, B, C, and D, and you have to be able to change it immediately. So it requires you to apply your talents, your experience, and also your personality. So, moving on to it, then the next part is you have to have an effective classroom strategy. Okay, if you're going to have a good classroom instruction, you have to have effective instructional strategies. You have to have effective management strategies and classroom curriculum design strategies. So let's talk about instructional strategies. Now, for this part over here, you have to know um, how your learners are, how they learn. You're paying attention to whether they are students who prefer mastery, or are they emotional learners? Are they people who are kinetic learners? They're active, they want to move around. So you have to pay attention to what strategies you will actually implement in the classroom. Now, sometimes you might just do, well, previously it used to be paper pencil. Now you have to embed into your instruction, you have to embed into it some technology, it has to be part of your instructional strategy. It cannot be used as an accessory. So, are you going to have the students have a discussion board? Are they going to be doing some research by themselves? Are you going to have them commenting? Are we going to have like a collective intellectual community where we're building on each other's ideas? Or is this going to be one on one? So, is it going to be a personal learning experience, or is it going to be like a group work? So you have to decide what your instructional strategy is going to be. Then you have to talk about the effective management strategies as well, how you're going to run your classroom, and where your materials are going to be located, how you're going to organize information for students, where they'll look, will it be automated, or will you have students have to ask you for materials? It's much better, of course, in this environment when you are trying to build a classroom where it's automated, where you want students to be independent and be able to find the materials. You have to organize your classroom in such a way that the students will be able to find the material quickly. This requires a lot of planning and a lot of organization at the beginning. But once it is you have those things in place, your classroom will essentially run itself. And then your curriculum design, you have to decide what the pacing is going to be. So if your school or your organization already has a curriculum, then you want to break it down in weeks. So week 1 to week 2, what do we do? And what are those things that the students are supposed to learn within that particular time frame? You have to identify specifically what the objective is going to be and exactly what the skills are going to be. In this area for the effective classroom curriculum design, you cannot paint with broad strokes. You cannot make general statements. Otherwise, you would essentially be wasting your time or your students' time as well. You have to be very, very specific about what it is that you want to teach your students. Now, effective teachers are proficient in exhibiting positive expectations for their students. You also are very good with classroom management, and you know your stuff as far as the lesson mastery. Positive expectations. This part is usually overlooked because it's assumed that, well, if the student is there, then they must want to learn. Not necessarily. Some students actually need a little bit more motivation so that they can accomplish their tasks. They just need a little push. They need a little bit of encouragement. They just need for the instructor to see that that student is actually there wanting to learn, but maybe they're having a difficult time getting started. They might feel that they're alone in the difficulty or the struggle that they might have. So if the instructor just gives a little bit of positive expectation, just set it out like, hey, you know what? I had trouble starting this assignment, or I've had a similar experience before, but this is what you need to do. Break it all the way down and encourage the student, encourage the learner as they go along to not to see the huge picture initially, because that could be a little intimidating. They might just want to break down the steps into smaller, attainable chunks. So give them something to work towards. Give it words of encouragement. If they don't do it correctly, ask them, what is it that you see that you could do differently? And every time you make an error, understand that that is part of the learning process, because once it is you do something wrong the first time, you are most likely not to do it again, because you're going to try and figure out how you can work that problem out. Now, classroom management, that's the biggest thing for any new teacher or anyone who's thinking about it. You must have a classroom management plan. You must have rules, consequences, and they don't have to be 15 rules. They could just be 5 rules. And best thing is to come up with those rules with your students as well as the consequences. Many times the students are in agreement with it, and you can run your classroom. You have to get your students in a routine. You have to let them know how things are going to be done and essentially what the outcomes of those things are. Have a discussion about it. But you're usually going to spend the first few months setting up your management style in your classroom, because you will always have the students respond and you have to reward or you have to correct the response that you get from them so that everyone is on the same page. Now, you also have to know your lessons. You have to understand your subject matter. Now, whether you've taught it before or not, you have to do a little bit more research. Don't just stick to the textbook. Don't just stick to the material that you're given. Go and do some research outside of that to bring some interest and to help you make connections to the lessons so that your students can make personal connections as well. Now, these positive expectations, let's go back to them. They are not to be confused with high standards. Some people tend to think that, oh, okay, if I have positive expectations, we're talking about making the work very, very difficult or anything like that. It's based on scientific study and research. It's really a direct relationship between teacher expectations and student achievements. Again, this is what you expect from the learner. If you have high expectations of your students that they're going to do well on an assessment, and you project that and you speak it into being, your students tend to believe it and they work towards what the expectation is. They work towards a standard. If you set a low standard and you expect high expectations, you are not going to get the same results. With classroom management, these practices procedures help you to maintain an environment in which instruction and learning can occur. Discipline has very little to do with classroom management. Punishment extinguishes any positive behavior that you are expecting the student to exhibit. It has to do with you establishing a productive and cooperative working environment. Students need to know what they're supposed to do in the classroom. They need to know how your classroom runs. Now, with the lesson mastery we talked about last, that part is about the teacher outcome and student outcome. So this shows you in a little bit more detail what should happen. In this aspect, the teacher must design the lesson in which a student learns a new concept or skill. And then the teacher must know how to evaluate the learning to determine the mastery of the concept or the skill. For the students, the student has to demonstrate that a concept has been comprehended and that they have ownership or knowledge of that particular skill or content. And the skill can be performed by a level of proficiency as determined by the instructor and or the criteria that you might have. So I hope these have been helpful to you and that you are able to gain something from this short presentation here. I will be loading some more. If you like this, please go ahead and share it and subscribe. My contact information is right here. My Instagram information is there, and I will post things very frequently. So please tune back in for another opportunity.